and welcome to the 2014 Sole Practitioners Conference. My name is Rachel Davis, and like you, I'm a sole practitioner. This time last year when I sat out in the audience, I never dreamt I'd be chairing this conference today. So for those of you who are used to Keith Ferguson welcoming you in Welsh, I'm afraid the best I can do is knee by gum because I come from Yorkshire. But I wanted to get more involved in the conference because I certainly took away quite a number of points last year which I was able to use in my everyday practice, and indeed have saved clients money as a result. So I'm looking forward to taking away some similar points today. The three main benefits of today, I think. First of all, CPD. We've all come here to go out wiser, better chartered accountants. Also, it's an ideal opportunity to use today to network and speak to the Institute. And thirdly, the future. What does the future hold? So CPD, of course, we're going to cover tax and accountancy, but also the economy, an economical update, a bit about what the Institute are doing at the moment. Secondly, it's your opportunity to network with sole practitioners, find out what their issues and concerns are and how they're dealing with them. But also we've got Institute staff and members of the practice committee, of which I'm one, and we sort of help to inform the Institute how developments affect the grassroots membership. So people from the Institute are here today, they've got silver badges on, and people from the practice committee have got blue flashes at the bottom of their name tag. So please do look us out at break or lunch and have a chat with any issues that's concerning you right now. And then finally, the future. What does the future hold? Are we ready for it? There's a panel session shortly after lunch, so there's more to come on that later. Just like to quickly thank our sponsors and exhibitors for contributing to us today. Please do go and visit them in, there's the two rooms on this level and the main reception room, if that's the right one, at the bottom of the stairs. So finally, the usual housekeeping things. My main job is to see us through to the drinks reception at 5:05 this evening on time. So at lunchtime you can help by making sure we do a switch over quite promptly. Like last year we were doing half going for lunch and half staying behind to listen to the pensions regulator, then at half time changing ends. So if we can do the swap over as swiftly as we can, that'd be great. Usual things then, if you've got anything that makes a noise, can you turn it off or onto silent? The Wi-Fi codes have been displayed, but they're also in this guest information pack, which is in your packs. Those Gen X, Gen Y amongst us, and those trying to keep up, who like to tweet, the Twitter address has been displayed, but again, I think it's hashtag SolePack2014. There's no fire drill planned for today, so here comes my airline hostess impression. If the fire bell goes, please follow the Institute staff back to exits. So without further ado, please sit back and enjoy the day, and without further ado, I'll introduce Rebecca Benningworth to talk to us about tax. Thank you, Rebecca.
Right, thank you, Rachel. Right, there'll just be a slight delay while I switch over machines. I'm going to put that down, that might make things go wrong. Okay, tax for just over an hour, and they very kindly put a big clock at the back so I can't run over. I was here on Tuesday night doing an address for new members at the new members ceremony. It's the first one I've attended. It was super, and I looked across to my normal place and thought, it's gone. So I sort of kept going until everybody looked bored and then shut up. So. Okay, so a tax update, and I'll move on with the slides in a minute. If you've heard me speak recently, not a lot's changed, so you might be hearing some stuff again, I'm afraid. Obviously, we have the Chancellor's Autumn Statement on Wednesday next week, the 3rd, which will probably have a bit of tax in it, increasingly it does, but it is very much more an economic outlook thing. But then we get the big day is on the 10th of December, which is L Day, where all the legislation for next year's Finance Act is released for comment. So we'll see the upshot of a number of consultations that have been going on. So what I'm going to do is take you through a few topical issues, the sorts of things I think are, good to sit back and have a bit of a think about. I'm going to look at some of the things that are coming over the next few months, and then I'm going to give us all a big, big pat on the back. And you might be able to guess what that's about. So let's dive in, and I need to get my little screen going. So hang on, let's do that. There we go. Okay. I just want to say a little bit about the transitional rules on AIA because I think it is a little bit challenging. Actually, what I'm going to do to keep moving, I'm going to bring this up here. Oh, wires, glasses of water. That's it, that's better. I can do this now. That's easier. Okay, it's really about the transitional period and the reduction of the limit in January 2016, because that creates for businesses a really nasty little gap in capital allowances, and I think for some of you this might be a surprise as to how bad it is. So at the moment we have the £500,000 limit. It's trolling along quite nicely. There's not a lot to be said about it. And then we'll see the limit go back down again on the 1st of January. And the current state of legislation is that it will go down to £25,000. Now, it's possible we have at least one budget and at the moment 2 autumn statements before then. So politicians of indeed any description may change that, but I'm pretty confident it's not going to stay anywhere near £500,000. And therefore you need to be ready to advise your clients. You also need to be pretty good on the definition of when expenditure is incurred, and that's in the Capital Allowances Act, section 5, and it essentially says when the obligation to pay becomes unconditional. So if you use the date of payment, you're not going to be a million miles away. So let's go on to the next slide and talk about this reduction. You will, according to the transitional rules, you will time apportion the limits and then make a further restriction. And I'm just going to illustrate that on my little writing screen for you so you can see how it's going to work. So let's imagine, I've said the limit is going down on the 31st of December 2015. Let's imagine that your client has a year-end 30th of June. In that accounting period, what we'll do is time apportion the limits in order to arrive at the overall limit for the period. Well, before the date of the change, we have 500,000. After the date of change, we have 25,000. I've made it nice and easy for you because you can do this in your head, I promise. 250,000 plus 12.5 is 262,500. So for the year ended 30th of June 2016, your clients have just over £250,000 available in capital allowances. But there is always, with transitional rules, whichever way the allowance is going, whether it's going up or down, there is always a restriction of part of the period. Now, if you struggle to remember, let me explain what the legislator is worried about. He's worried about businesses continuing to spend at an inflated level after the limit has gone down. So it is natural that this period, the period after the date of change, will suffer a restriction, and that's exactly what happens. And that period is unfortunately restricted to the time apportioned amount of the new limit. And you've already worked that out, that's £12,500. So the reason I wanted to bring this to your attention today is not because I think lots of you have got clients spending £500,000. but I do think lots of you might have clients who might want to go and spend 20,000 on a new van. And if they do that in January 2016, or indeed in the case of this business, in April, May 2016, they will not get AIA on that 20,000, in spite of the fact that the limit is actually 25,000, they will only get AIA of 12.5. So you can see that for any period spanning the date of change, you've got what I'll call a lacuna in allowances. There's a gap, and they would really be best advised not to go out and incur any amount of capital expenditure, substantial capital expenditure, between the 1st of January 2016 and the end of that accounting period. Obviously, you can now see that if we were on a March year end, it would be even worse, because there would only be 6,250 in that period, in spite of the fact that the total allowances for the period would be up to 375 or so, because you'll be on a more substantial element of the £500,000. So with a total allowance of knocking on £400,000, but only 6,250 in the last 3 months, it would be very, very easy for clients to come badly unstuck. And what they will have in their mind, because you will have told them, is this is the spend it or lose it period. It's the last period in which the increased allowance is available, and they may well get it wrong. So that 31st December date is absolutely crucial. Now, I've added in at the bottom of the slide for you another little bit to bear in mind. If you are looking at the date that expenditure is incurred, and that means the date it comes in for capital allowances, then look at the last line of the slide. If an asset is bought on hire purchase, then it must be in use to qualify for capital allowances. So we can imagine here our farmer who wants to go and buy a nice new John Deere tractor, and he's got it fixed in his mind that you've told him he's got to get it before Christmas 15. So he treats himself to a Christmas present of a shiny, beautiful green tractor with a leaping deer on the front of it, and it arrives in Christmas week. On the 23rd of December, the low loader delivers his pride and joy, and he walks round it admiringly and then moves it into the shed and goes about his business. He has no cause to use his tractor over the Christmas period, and it comes into use in mid-January. Now, you might well argue, well, HMRC isn't going to know that, but it doesn't make it right. So, and if it were a combine, you'd be absolutely sunk, because there's nothing in combine in Christmas. I know up in Yorkshire, when I was doing this in rural Yorkshire, some bright spark said, but there's driver training. And I said, yeah, but there's also a foot of snow on the ground, so away with you. It is just a case of being familiar. Because I know the farming trade, although I don't now act for any farmers, but I know the business very well, most big purchases come on HP. It's just the way agriculture works. So I can use that one as a good example, but it could be anything. I mean, don't forget, with this £500,000, you could fill a field with solar panels. I think it's quite revolting, but however, you could fill a field. It's very widely known that you can't get 100% allowances on solar panels if you're also getting the FIT payments. But that 100% allowances is the allowance within the Enhanced Capital Allowances Scheme, the ECA Special Energy Savings Scheme. AIA is a completely different allowance. Of course you can get 100% AIA on a field full of solar panels and take your FIT payments as well if you want to. So, you know, don't minimise this and relegate it to people who drive combine harvesters and a few other big bits of equipment. It really is something that businesses can genuinely use. So get it while it's good, but remember the limitations. So what we'll do now is we'll move on to another topic, and I will just highlight for you just a little bit of a development on research and development. What's quite interesting, I find, is that there are now more and more small businesses coming into the R&D fold. I think it's more that they are realising that there is relief, or their advisors are realising that there is relief, rather than they're doing more R&D. But I'm now getting a steady stream of delegates coming to me after courses where I've mentioned R&D, giving me examples of what it is their client is doing that has attracted R&D. It's very interesting indeed. And one of the themes that's quite common with delegates is they never realised that that was R&D. They just thought they were moving the business on. So if I can give you the question that HMRC uses, one of them, to decide whether you're doing R&D, the question they ask is, what was the nature of the uncertainty that was being resolved? And if that question sounds intelligent, it's likely your client is doing R&D. So one chap was telling me his client makes alloy wheels, which is not really terribly cutting edge nowadays. Any old Tom, Dick and Harry has them on their car. But they were trying to have alloy wheels painted in a particular design, and they found that the paint that they had would not adhere to the alloy. So they were doing a bit of research and development to try and find out how to make this paint stick to the alloy. Okay, the nature of the uncertainty being resolved was what do I need to do in relation either to the paint or the aluminium to get the paint to stay on when I put it on. Now that doesn't sound terribly scientific, but it absolutely 100% is R&D. So by getting an R&D claim in, what they had was significantly enhanced deduction for the expenditure and available if they went into loss, and that the hook I've got to hang this on is the increase in payable tax credit. Since R&D came in 2000, the rate of R&D and the payable tax credit rate have had a relationship of 25%. In other words, whatever your scale up on your deduction, by the time you'd surrendered a loss for payment, you get 25p in the pound of the money you spent. So if I spend 1,000, it'll be scaled up as a deduction. When it becomes a loss and I surrender it for tax credit payment, I'll get, I forgot how much I said, £1,000, £250 back. That, for the first time this year, has changed. And that's partly about government recognising that businesses are having trouble raising finance. So government is chucking in a little bit more money in the pot. It's modest, but it shows that government is aware, and also it shows that government is very, very committed to the technology and the innovation sector. That's what this country does as an economic activity. We might not make shoes in Somerset anymore, but we do innovate. So that's a key plank of our economic pattern, and the tax system actually drives that quite well. So you'll get, if you spend £1,000 now on R&D and end up in a loss-making situation, you'll now get £330 to help support your next phase of expenditure. That's very useful. But I thought I'd just add a couple of other points just to, let's say, amplify this a bit. First of all, although many of you deal with quite small businesses, some of you will deal with larger businesses, and the conventional limits for SME do not apply to the R&D scheme. They are doubled. So you're looking at 500 employees and double, the employee test is mandatory, but then double the turnover and balance sheet figures that you're used to. So quite significant sized companies can benefit from SME R&D. And then finally, I thought I'd throw in a little twist. If you have been loss-making because your client has been developing something and bringing it to the market, and let's just imagine for a moment James Dyson with his revolutionary vacuum cleaner that nobody would take off his hands, and he decided he'd have to make it himself. down near me in Malmesbury, when he actually came into profit, what he might have had, and I think actually he predated this, but what he might have had is a long succession of surrendered R&D losses and at last a taxable profit. And I emphasise a taxable profit, not just a reporting profit, so he's actually now going to cough up some tax for the first time. His losses have been surrendered at a rate of 14.5%, but if he sets them against profits, he will achieve 20% relief for those losses. So what the slide is indicating to you, that the first time you have a corporation tax return in front of you showing a taxable profit, before you complete it, you will return to the previous year, refile the return, stripping out the surrender of losses and substituting a carry forward. That means that the payable tax credit that your client has had will be repayable, but what you'll do is immediately file the current corporation tax return showing a set-off at 20% rather than a surrender at 14.5%. So do remember to do that. It's not gaming the system, it is perfectly acceptable, and really it's what your client should expect you to do if he had a better understanding of how these things work. So I think that's quite an important tip, to just remember to refile, strip out the surrender, and then do a carry forward, because you're going to get more value for money. But only any point doing it on the brink of paying tax, because then the two will unwind themselves. You'll get a small interest charge, but there'll be actually no payable amount as a result of clawing back the tax credit. Let's look at another subject quite briefly. Social investment tax relief, introduced in this year's Finance Act, and driven by, I will say, the Cabinet Office and not the Treasury. My view is that social enterprise is going to form an extremely important part of our economy and therefore our client base over the next 5 to 10 years. There are lots of social enterprises around, but there are lots more still to come. They perform a number of roles, and for those who are perhaps not familiar with the idea, let's just bottom out a really, really simple definition of what social enterprise is. It is a business, but it is a business whose objectives are other than pure profit. Most of them will need to turn a profit to still be there next year, but that isn't their motive. Their motive is some social outcome. So social enterprises in my part of the world run shops, run a travelling library, run a pub, and indeed in one particularly successful enterprise, run a shop in which post office counters have been arm-twisted into opening a counter twice a week. So they've actually retained the village post office by dint, I will say, of some pretty amazing lobbying. So they, as you can see, Cabinet Office would think this is a terribly good thing, because one thing that social enterprises are doing is picking up the slack as perhaps other aspects are withdrawn, either conventional businesses or, of course, not to put too fine a point on it, government and local authority services. So they are filling quite an important gap. But also near me, there's a very, very long-standing social enterprise which does an absolutely fabulous job. It is run in a very, very old woolen mill, Cotswold Stone woolen mill, and it runs a coffee shop and cafeteria, and the object of the social enterprise is to provide training and employment for young people with severe learning difficulties. And the young people come in and get some confidence just by being in a work environment for the first time in their lives, and then gradually acquire food preparation skills, skills of service at table or clearing, and indeed operating the till, supervised by paid members of staff, and the young people are of course paid a salary as well. But the idea behind the organisation is not just to provide jobs for a few, but to actually move these young people on into conventional employment in the hospitality sector, and it does that very, very successfully. So, a range of social enterprises. You can see why on a policy level government would say this is a good thing, capital G, capital T. So, what can we do to stimulate social enterprise? Well, we might take a leaf out of the filthy money illustration and throw EIS relief at social enterprises. So that's what social investment tax relief is. It is essentially EIS relief, which has provided capital to small and to growing businesses into the social enterprise sphere. Now, I think there are two reasons for you to be aware of this. Firstly, you may have successful business clients who want to give something back and have maybe been thinking about what they might be able to do. One of the ways they might give back is by taking up an issue of shares in a qualifying social enterprise. But as you'll see from the slide, it's even simpler than that. What they might do is lend money to a qualifying social enterprise. And this is the bit that most people find quite startling. What, you mean I can lend money to a social enterprise and have 30% tax relief and defer my capital gains? To which the answer is, of course. That's what it says on the slide. That's what it says in the legislation. Will I have to pay the tax relief back when my loan is repaid? No, provided that's over 3 years later, you will not have to pay your tax relief back. But I'm afraid you used probably not quite the right word in the word when. I think you probably ought to be thinking about if, because you will lose your money, okay? Well, you might not, but government wouldn't be giving you tax relief if it was that easy. So whether people go with shares or go with debt, because the social enterprise is not a company limited by shares, and that's the main reason to go for a debt instrument, this is obviously a pretty long-term, if not permanent, investment. But for those who want to give something back, it might be entirely appropriate. The other reason, of course, for mentioning it is that there is a wide variety of social enterprises out there now, and that is growing. That is a growing sector. You will see them as clients. So it is also worth thinking about whether you want to target the market of new social enterprises to support them. I know one chartered tax advisor who, in a rush of blood to the head, has actually set up a tax advice social enterprise to give tax advice to social enterprises. Sorry, it's a bit confusing. I must admit, when he sat me down over coffee and explained it to me, my head was spinning. But what he did, he's the sort of chap, and I know there are one or two people here from my part of the world, but if I say Stroudy, people from around Gloucestershire know what I mean. They're a particular breed of people. This chap a few years ago decided to sell his house and go and live on a narrowboat, and that's ever so Stroud. So we have a chap who's got chartered tax advisor, business, practice, very, very successful person, but wants to give something back. Did a bit of looking at this. I actually had coffee with him in Storr-on-East, if you're from Stroud. Now that is really where the Stroudies go. You can find old Dale in there anytime. Dale is a sort of local celebrity. He owns a company called Ecotricity, which puts him in the top 10 Sunday Times rich list, and is frequently seen pottering around Stroud in his open-toed sandals, even at this time of year with his dreadlocks. He is a former tree hugger and now a very successful businessman, and has turned a whole football club vegetarian, including the supporters. Anyhow, we had a coffee, and I told him about this because I knew he'd be interested in it, and he went off, read it all weekend, rang me up and said, can we have another coffee? He said, I've decided I've set up a social enterprise because there's no information out there on the tax benefits of social enterprise. I've been onto the umbrella body, they don't know anything about it. Social enterprises need someone to advise them about their tax situation, so I've set up a specialist business, and that's going to provide tax and professional support to social enterprises at a knockdown rate. And I looked at him and said, yes, okay. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I know the next question is, are you going to give me some time for nothing? So I thought I'd save you asking it. So I have now link myself in with a social enterprise. But the point is this, there are very, very few people out there advising and supporting these businesses. There is no need for you to form a social enterprise if you want to do it as a money-making venture. That's absolutely fine. But be aware, these clients are out there and this sector is going to grow.
Rebecca?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Pre-IS,
Yeah.
the money has to be at the beginning of the business.
Um,
Does it have to in this as well?
Well, you will have to have an issue of shares. It doesn't have to be a startup. And indeed that's CDIS, isn't it? You can use EIS to expand an existing business, but with this one, yes, what the social enterprise would need to do is decide perhaps there was a project they wanted to do or an expansion, decide that they're going to actually issue some shares and then do an offering of those shares. So this is not a cheap thing. You're not going to do it for a couple of £1,000. A loan might actually be much more effective for that and issue some debt paper, debentures or such like. As far as qualifying debt is concerned, provided it doesn't rank in front of any other debt and isn't secured over the assets of the enterprise, then you've got qualifying debt. You can have a coupon on it, provided that's reasonable. So debt is actually, for small amounts, debt is the obvious way to do it. Shares, it's a bit more heavyweight because you are going to go for an EIS issue. But no, it doesn't need to be actually right at the outset. This is expansion money for existing social enterprises as well. Okay, let's move on and look at something else. Let me just highlight for you, we're well into the first year of employment allowance. I predict that it will be around for another year because it would be complete political lunacy to abolish it about a month before a general election or so. So I think it will be here next year, but you have to regard this as a temporary relief. It is a job stimulator in the private sector. Anyway, they just commission a telly ad. You're going to have to run that for a bit to get your money back. Grief. Oh well, anyway. One of the things that wasn't clear at the outset, and I think has gradually become clear, but I think HMRC's guidance is pretty flawed in this, is the definition of which businesses can get it. And we started off with all businesses and charities. That was the statement. All businesses and charities can get employment relief. So obviously it excludes employers of carers, which is unfortunate, and other things like public bodies like your local authority, county council and so on. However, it then became clear that businesses delivering public services were swept up into the definition of a public body. So it does mean that quite a lot of perfectly legitimate businesses, something you would never think was a public body, is defined as a public body for this purpose. So I'm raising it now because you might have the difficult task of going back to your client and unpicking an employment allowance claim. And the one I think is the biggest fault in HMRC's guidance is not including care homes. Care homes is a huge business sector. They employ lots of people, although some of them not paid enough to pay anyway, but we'll assume they can clock up £2 grand a year in Nick. But they are, if they have publicly funded residents, then they are likely to be viewed as delivering public services. Now, it goes on a simple majority, and it is fairly flexible. You are not required to use turnover, you are not required to use any particular measure. So you might use number of staff, you might use number of residents, you might use turnover. In fact, I probably would use turnover because I think they'll charge the private occupants more than they can charge the local authority. So if there's a chance of skewing it the right way, then turnover will do it as opposed to anything else. But I think that is a major flaw in the guidance. GP practices are out because they deliver public services, but they're in the guidance. There is a discussion about dentists. So you would know that if a dentist provides only NHS services, they are providing public services and therefore are out. But most dental practices will have say 3 or 4 private dentists and 1 who takes NHS patients. If you go on a simple head count, you've got a majority private, you've got no problem with NIC employer relief. So it's things like care homes, domiciliary care providers is another one that's not in the example, nursery schools is not in the example. And all of those I think are worth thinking about. One that's come pretty recently onto the agenda because of old Cleggie's idea is businesses set up to provide school meals under the new Free School Meals for Little Ones plan. Now, if a business only provides school meals based on this new national entitlement, then I'm afraid it's delivering public services. So my bone here is with the quality of the guidance and the fact that it didn't get real enough and it didn't alert people enough to where the dangers were. Added to which, of course, Dave wrote to everybody, including thousands of businesses who couldn't get employment allowance, to tell them they could get employment allowance, and that just hasn't helped. So just be aware of these difficulties, and I'm sorry to have to send you back to your firms to maybe break some bad news to clients. The new marriage allowance, or a prompt to retirement. And indeed, one delegate yesterday up in East Midlands, just outside Nottingham, said to me at coffee break, well, that's it, you've decided me now, I'm going. I've had enough and I can't do it anymore. So I hope not to drive you to retirement with this one, but all I want to do is think about delivering this new relief in as cost-effective a way as possible, ideally costing almost nothing, because nothing is how much you're going to be able to bill it at. So, you know, you've got to meet clients' expectations, but they have no expectations of paying any extra for this service. The new marriage allowance works like this. Somebody decides to elect to reduce their personal allowance, and then somebody else who is married or a civil partner to that person claims the extra allowances and thereby reduces their tax liability by £201, I think it is. You can elect in year, but given the conditions for the relief, let me quickly remind you that you must both be basic rate taxpayers at a maximum. It's probably risky to elect in year. After all, by the end of the tax year, you may not be married to that person anymore and may not want to give them your personal allowances. You may also, of course, turn out to be a higher rate taxpayer, or they turn out to be a higher rate taxpayer, and you've got a fair deal of unpicking to do. So retrospective election is possible and therefore preferable, because for all of us, if we are putting in an election on behalf of a client, okay, and this would be a client who has insufficient income to cover their personal allowance, then the time when we know that is when we finish the tax return. Because there we've seen the capital allowance claims, the AIA, or whatever it is that's reduced our client's income to a very low level, the brought forward losses, or whatever else it is that means an election is appropriate. So I think for practitioners, it's going to be a tax return job. It's going to be probably a tick in a box, but they haven't finalised the 2016 tax return yet, because it's still that far away. But I think that's going to be the way to do it, and that's minimum cost after all. So long as you remember to think about it, it's not going to cost a lot to do it. If you do elect on the tax return, the other benefit is that you only elect for the year that relates to that return. You're not putting in an open-ended election, which is what you do if you elect in year. So it's a bit more easy to cope with and control. And know exactly where you are. So I think that's a no-brainer for tax advisors. But then you've elected, what needs to happen now is the spouse who, let's say, is employed on a salary of £15,000 a year, needs to claim the benefit of the tax allowance by making a claim in some way as yet unspecified, and then that going off to HMRC. Now, it might be unspecified, but here's a prediction for you. It'll be done online, because HMRC are not handling paper anymore. They have enough paper to be going on with, and they're not creating any systems that create more paper. And that's sensible, it's perfectly sensible. So, the spouse or civil partner will have to log on and do something, click something, submit something to say, I hereby claim the benefit of an additional £1,050 personal allowance. If you imagine, we are sometime after the end of the particular tax year where this benefit will lie, so that claim will have to go burrowing off into the RTI records, and if I'm cynical I'll say never to be seen again, but ideally it will generate a P800 notice showing an overpayment of £201, and then either a payable order or a payment into the bank account of the recipient, and then we're done. Okay. The problem is, we're not going to do that. You and I, how many ways could that lot that I've just said go wrong? And, you know, let me count the ways. So, I think what we're probably going to have to do is manage this carefully. We might make an election, and we might give to our client a crib sheet to take home to their spouse or civil partner to say, here is where you log on, you have to click this box, then if it goes wrong, here's the number to ring, here's the website, and if all else fails, here's the address of your MP. No, don't bother with the last bit. But it's a clear indicator and a steer that this is not on our patch. I think we need to help them to deliver that, otherwise why are we even bothering to do the election? And I actually think, I mean, delegates asked me yesterday, couldn't you just stick in a letter of engagement, we're not doing it? And I said, yeah, I'm with you, but I just don't think you can. I don't think you can claim to be someone who gives tax advice to people and then says, but not married allowance, because it's too complicated and I can't bill you for it. So I think it's about managing the task. Let me flip it, because of course there's the other way. It might be the spouse who reduces their allowance and your client claims the 200 quid. Well, claiming the 200 quid is an absolute breeze. You'll stick it on the tax return. But if you look at step 1 and step 2, you'll see that step 1 comes before step 2. So you would have to be sure that your client's spouse or civil partner have made the election before you submit the tax return, otherwise it's wrong. So you bring crib sheet number 2. Here is what your spouse needs to do, and then you need to confirm to me they've done it, and then I'll file your tax return. I am at the moment working on how these crib sheets might be worded, and so I will actually publicise, here's an easy way to do it, so that you don't all have to reinvent the wheel. But I genuinely think this is the only way to deliver this in a way that isn't going to cost you a fortune, but is going to meet client expectations. If the election is done by the spouse, but your client's going to get a reduced tax bill, I think it's your job to make that happen. You're going to have to know, are you married, are you a civil partner, and what ballpark is your spouse's income? You're going to have to know it, I'm afraid, and blame the government. It's not a happy place. If at this point you feel like you need to retire, you're not alone. There are quite a few. Okay, what else have we got? BPRA, I just want to say a little bit about that, and for those who've heard me on the Tolly series of lectures recently, don't worry, I'm not going to do the whole thing, but it is a very, very attractive relief. It provides 100% relief for an appropriate investment, and that 100% comes as first year allowances. So let me just tell you a little bit of help about it. You've got the resources on your slides. You've got assisted areas search, gov.uk, and I'll just draw you a little picture of what it might be. I'm going to tell the story of the Welsh farmer and his wife, who started making earlier this year artisan meat pies. Now, the only conclusion I could draw from the statement artisan meat pies is that they're very expensive. Apparently, this has been an extremely successful venture. The farm is actually in the foothills of Mount Snowdon, and she's struggling to keep up with demand. She really needs to employ a couple of people to build this on, or stop, really. And you will get businesses that get to that point. If they can't grow and they can't service the market they've managed to create, then they're better off stopping. So they looked around for quite some period for an appropriate small manufacturing unit that she could actually employ some people and go into production. Until then, she's been doing it in the farmhouse kitchen. You won't be surprised to hear that there isn't actually a great deal, or there are not a great deal of small factory units in the foothills of Snowdon, or anywhere that's reasonably commutable up and down the Llanberis Pass from there, so they drew a blank. So following a session up there talking about regional reliefs and things like that, where I talked about assisted areas, what their advisor, a delegate, described to me was, oops, that wasn't meant to happen, hang on, let's do that again, was an unused business premises. It's unused because half the roof's fallen in. It needs to be empty for at least 12 months. Well, somewhere around 12 to 24 years is the answer on this one. So we've got empty business premises. They're in an assisted area. I'll show you a picture of an assisted area map in a minute. Actually, they're by the track that goes up to the farmhouse. That means, and I will illustrate, we have electricity and water going past the front of it, which is what we're going to need. So a barn, let's say a couple of acres away from anything, isn't going to be a lot of use, but this one absolutely tips the box. So what's he going to get? He's going to get 100% first year allowances for the capital works to bring this empty business premises back into use. He's also going to get 100% first year allowances for the repairs that he does, bringing that back into use. Just suspend your puzzlement for a moment, I'll come back on that one. He needs to keep ownership of the premises for at least 5 years, but that's okay. He's not planning on selling up his farm anytime soon. And it needs to be business premises when it's finished. And what it's going to be is a small industrial kitchen, a distribution point for the vans to back up to, and a teeny tiny retail unit, so that they can actually start selling retail from that unit as well. And absolutely everything they spend will be 100% relief. Now, because it's being done in the context of a trade, for occupation by the trade, all those allowances will create you a trading loss, okay? But the reason we have 100% first year allowances for repairs is if you had an investor who was going to do up premises to rent out, he would be incurring property losses. Now, property losses that relate to 100% first year allowances, that wasn't meant to happen like that, it's meant to happen like that. 100% first year allowances in a property business can go sideways. So although I've got a property loss, that is available for sideways relief. So the intelligence of bringing in the repairs means that your sideways relief extends not just to your fabric of the building work in capital terms, but also to any incidental repairs. So we're now looking at a very, very substantial property loss which can be relieved sideways. Now, to a room full of people who know even a bit about tax, you're bound to react by saying, hang on a minute, isn't sideways relief a bit dodgy these days? Haven't they shut a lot of it down? Well, they have. The first thing they did was say you have to spend at least 25 hours a week actively engaged in the trade before you can set your losses off sideways. But that relates to trading losses. These are not trading losses. There is no 25 hours a week requirement. Secondly, we have the Finance Act 2013 cap, which you will remember cap you at £50,000 worth of relief or 25% of total income. It doesn't apply. There is a specific subparagraph in the relevant section that says losses arising as a result of business premises renovation allowance are not affected. So whether it is in the trade of the wife, she can take those allowances sideways against her share of farming profits. Whether it is an investor who's gone in but actually has a jolly decent salary in the city, he will be able to relieve those losses without limit against that salary. And the final point is and let me do a circle here now, the capital element is also CGT based cost. So you will get tax relief twice for the expenditure that you have laid out. Now do you understand why Tesco's have been buying pubs? They have been using business premises renovation allowance. Now all of this depends entirely on the business being in an assisted area. So I'll show you a picture of what the assisted areas look like. In your notes there's enough information to download a spreadsheet which will list these out as council wards. So I'm just giving you a snapshot here to give you an idea of where we're talking about. For investors from the city, they might fancy a surf shop in Cornwall, and they'd be fine because, as you can see, Cornwall and indeed the Isles of Scilly, if you really wanted to push the boat out, are all an assisted area. Now on this map, this is the 2014 designation, so we've got new ones starting 1st of July 14, and it doesn't matter which colour your assisted areas are, the colour arrives from the way in which they were designated, but it's irrelevant, all assisted areas are equal. You can see for our Snowdonia farmer that as far as he can see is assisted even across the Menai Straits, as is indeed a large part of South Wales, including the beautiful Gower coast from where our former chair came. We've got the northwest of Scotland and the Western Isles, but I would discount those if I were you. The reason for the designation is that it's very sparsely populated, so you're not going to get a lot of takers for whatever you're doing up there. But as you can see, there are all over the country lots of assisted areas that might be of interest to your client. So if I go back to the slides, you can put in your search engine, and I tend to not say the G word now after I read a shocking story in the newspaper, which we know always tell the truth, of course, about that company. And that was a lady who had been discussing with her amour on some sort of Google chat thing about, let's say, forthcoming nuptials, but they hadn't actually decided that it was question asked and answered by that point. So question was being sort of gently aired, and she suddenly was getting bombarded with adverts for diamonds and wedding dresses and wedding venues, and she said, Google knew I was going to get married before my family, in fact before me, and she therefore has not used the G search engine since. And I thought, crikey, it's all getting a bit Big Brother, isn't it? So, put into the search engine of your choice, Assisted Areas 2014, take the gov.uk answer, you'll find loads of stuff on assisted areas. And on the business premises renovation allowance, I've just sort of touched on briefly, you'll find HMRC's capital allowance manual very, very good. Slight caveat, it hasn't been updated for some of the changes in the Finance Act 2014 yet, so be aware there have been a few changes, but the definitions on qualifying property, qualifying interest, all that good base level stuff, really solid in the manual, so you can rely on that for some of the basic definitions. Okay, I've said all of that. and draw all of that. So let's talk about something that is coming up. So I've got a couple of future things to tell you about. So non-resident CGT. Now, for those of you who have tax returns looming, you might want to mark this one down for February when I come back. Whether it's come back to consciousness, or come back from skiing, or come back from the sun, or whatever is your choice, I think this is one to pick up then. For some of you, you can start turning it over a bit sooner. Again, I think a diagram would be appropriate, and like most of my diagrams, it starts with a rectangle. So this rectangle happens to be a dwelling in the UK. Now the proposal, and it will definitely happen, is to extend capital gains tax to non-residents, both individuals and corporate, on UK dwellings. Okay. Now, some of you who know the ATED regime will know that actually non-resident corporates owning a dwelling costing more than 2 million are already in CGT as a result of the ATED regime. So I just want to park them over there. If you've no idea what I'm talking about, with a bit of luck, it doesn't apply to your clients. Okay, right, CGT to non-residents, and I'm going to think about an individual. We have an individual who is, let's say, French resident in northern France. He owns a house in southern England, and HMRC have decided that's going to be liable to capital gains tax in future. But the French resident actually knows a little bit about UK capital gains tax, so he contacts an advisor and he advises them that he spends around 8 weeks a year in England, in his UK dwelling, having a little holiday maybe, going to watch Wimbledon, whatever, for whatever reason, around about 8 weeks a year. And as you know, someone who's got 2 homes, but actually lives in their holiday home for a short period, but genuinely lives in it for a short period a year, can elect for that home to be their principal private residence. So you're in exactly the same position as you are with a client with 2 homes in the UK, except this one is a no-brainer. There's no weighing up the loss of PPR on this one in exchange for PPR on that one, because that one is never going to be liable to UK capital gains tax. So it is an obvious thing to elect that the UK dwelling becomes PPR. Well, thanks to HMRC, they've spotted that one coming a mile off. So they've said, we have a problem. And the proposed solution to that problem is a bit tricky for you and I, because they want to abolish the election. Now, I'll be fair and say, in the conduct they said, we know this is a bit of a nuclear option, but we can't think of anything else, but if you can, we'd love to hear it. So the proposal, and I think the only proposal that's going to work, is to abolish the election and to determine PPR based on the facts, probably by reference to a tax year. Quite a lot of people have said to me, why can't you just abolish the election for non-residents? And I've had to reply that that's not very European. The European Parliament sling that out before you could say tea cakes. So I think that, you know, that's just not a runner, and it wouldn't stick, and it'd be undone ab initio, so let's not go there. The facts are how many nights you spent there in a tax year. So the place that you spent the most nights will become your PPR. Mine's going to be a travel lodge on the M1. Sadly. Okay, so there are a number of issues here for you to start thinking about. Obviously, we won't know which way they've decided to jump. I like that date. It's mathematically pleasing, 10, 12, 14. So on the 10th of December, we will find out which way they've gone, but I honestly don't see any other plausible options. As a result of that, clients may need advice before the date of change. And the date of change will be the 6th of April, which is why I've said to some of you, look, this will wait, you've got 6 weeks to give advice and to do things. But for those of you who are perhaps more less involved in tax returns and more involved in just general giving advice, you might like to chew it over. One of the things is, of course, when we get the legislation, it'll probably just be amending legislation, so you would have to sit and study the clauses, the draft clauses, with TCGA 222 to 225 open in front of you, and I don't think many people want to spend Boxing Day doing that. I don't particularly want to spend Boxing Day doing that. I've actually just been told we've got a home game of football, so I'm going to be spending Boxing Day cooking burgers anyway. But I will be spending quite a bit of the Christmas period studying this and trying to look and see what are the advice points that come out of it. You know, they might be, it's going to happen, get over it. They might be, there's nothing you can do. But do think about those clients who are abroad at the moment, for whom their sort of rule of thumb is, provided you haven't come back within 5 years, it's going to be a tax-free sale. Well, it's not anymore. So if they've done their 5 years, then if they want a tax-free sale, it's got to be actually not before April, because if it is PPR or has ever been PPR, they've got the last 18 months, remember. Which is why I'm saying you don't need to rush about and do the headless chicken thing now. You have got a bit of time, but don't miss it. Clients with 2 homes, some of them the election's going to be undone. Clients who've not flipped, okay, maybe they'll want to flip. Maybe when they abolish flipping, which is what this does as well, it's got a little handy byblow, maybe when they abolish it, they will stop you backdating it before the date of change. So you might need to flip in March for 3 days. Okay, I'm working on the assumption that most people understand that flipping means elect for the other one and then elect back 2 days later, so you park 18 months of exempt gain on a property that would otherwise be fully taxable. It must be your home, okay? You can't flip to a buy-to-let, even by moving in for a few days between tenants. That's not a home. Okay, right, so that's just sort of teed you up. Yeah, question?
What date will the base cost for the capital gains be? Will it be on the 6th of April 2015, or would it be...
I am virtually certain that they will have to put a rebasing option in, which they've done for the other measure, the ATED measure. You'll go rule of thumb, time apportion, but option to elect for rebasing to 15 if you want to. And then if it ever has been a home, your foreign guys, you know, would still actually want to elect, wouldn't they? So that it has ever been a home, so they get 18 months tax-free. And then that will give them time to actually organise the sale. Watch out for the election being withdrawn. You know you can backdate by 2 years, okay? But if they pull it away, what they might say is, well, you can't now make an election and backdate it across the line. That's the one that's dangerous, where you might need to put elections in March, okay? Now, I've slightly blown your brains out with detail there, but so long as you just keep turning it over, let us do the heavy lifting. By us, I mean the tax authors, okay? It'll be all over the tax press by the time you come back from tax returns. So we'll do the heavy lifting, and then you can just take the results and go off and do it. Okay, a couple more topics I want to touch on before I finish. Company car tax. Lots of you will have seen the highly promoted article on Accounting Web, which was really just an interview with me. They said, could I write one? I said, look, I'm sorry, I just really don't have time, but I do have a lot of views. So Rob Lovell rang me up and I did a download on him for about half an hour, and he said, blimey, I've got enough for about 4 articles. I said, well, there you go. So it is particularly for the owner-manager. The company car is sort of pretty much almost out, and even for the employee, because the tax is going up so fast, it probably isn't going to be around for much longer. For the owner-manager, it's not just the rapidly rising rate of tax that you've got, okay? It is the capital allowances, and for those who haven't seen it, a quick look at the capital allowances illustration. And it's all right, it's going to be pictures, not numbers. So what we've got is a car we buy for 20,000, run it for 3 years and sell it for 5. So this is a business car. Okay, so it's going to cost us 15 grand over 3 years. It's an 8% emitter. It's the only thing we've got in a special rate pool, but it is a special rate pool item. So the graph shows you on the blue line the cash cost over the 3 years. So I've amortised it evenly over the 3 years. It costs me after year 1, 5, after year 2, 10, and after year 3, 15. And it doesn't cost anymore because it's gone. So that's why that goes flat. I want tax relief for my £15,000. What does that look like? Not terribly attractive actually, because for those of you who can't quite see at the far end of the slide, we're up to 25 years and we've just managed to breast the